for you, known as a syllabus. Did everyone have a good break? Anyone do anything exciting? Yes, Amanda.
I went to go see the Texans beat the Raiders.
Oh, that's pretty cool.
That was a lot of fun.
That is definitely pretty cool. You know, I had 2 IAs in my office today. And did you guys do anything interesting? How many folks going on cruises?
Yeah.
Who are these people? I don't go on cruises.
Oh, so sorry.
I was supposed to make a trip to the coast to do some fishing. I did not get to go.
Oh.
I was sick, and so was everyone in my house, one after another, domino effect. And my wife really wanted to go to Big Bend for our wedding anniversary. Alas, not to be. We settled for a quick dinner at Kirby Lane, but we're feeling too sick to stay around for dessert. So we went home and napped. So I didn't have much fun this break, but I did get a lot of reading time. And that counts for something. What I want to do here is go over the syllabus with you, and then we'll chit-chat about who you are and about the course and things of that nature. First of all, you see the books up there right near the top of the syllabus, required reading. Anyone have there was a problem with the Tocqueville book. I looked last week at some point and they used a different translation, which means the pages won't match. Is that all squared away? Does everyone have, your book should look like this, your Tocqueville book, unless you got a really old one. But the key is you want Hopper Perennial Modern Classics. And you should have got an email from the bookstore telling you they're holding one for you. So you can go over and get that. No, but it's a hard copy, not online. I think what they did was I ordered the hard copy and they decided it was easier to order digital, so she used a different translation. But I caught them in time, so I stopped them.
Did you just order Tocqueville or all the others?
I ordered all the others, but Tocqueville was where there was a problem. Tocqueville was where there was an issue. Everything else seemed more or less in order. So this asks a question. Other than Tocqueville, which I assume people have squared away, if you haven't, let me know. Any other book issues? Going once, going, okay, very good. Next item, I know you love reading course descriptions, especially the long ones. The university is making us make all course descriptions longer. But I'll trust you to read that on your own. And we'll skip down to course requirements and grading. Okay, the big takeaway down there, read it. I don't mind if you're reading while I talk. The big takeaway is you are required to write 4 papers in this class. They're 6 to 8 pages. When we're getting near assigning papers in a couple of weeks, I will give you a handout about writing the papers. I will give you topics. You will spend a few minutes discussing all that. For now, the big takeaway is 4 6 to 8 page papers roughly. In terms of weighting them for grading purposes, I will double your 3 highest grades to create 7 grades overall. The reason I do it that way, you might say, why don't you just drop one and count through, is each paper covers a different portion of the course. None of them are like comprehensive. So I want everyone to, learn the material in each portion of the course. But I know that, sometimes you have trouble with a paper. Maybe you're very busy. Maybe some other faculty member has another paper due that week. Although, why would they interfere with my schedule by doing this? Like they haven't checked with me. So I want to give you a chance where you can have one paper that's weak and not have it really mess up and tear down your grade for the entire semester. They're not research papers. They're analytical papers. They're based on what you read with me, the class reading, and based on the lectures. So I can't stop you from going to the library and using other sources, and if you really want, go to it. But that's not what these papers are intended. They're not intended to be research. They're intended to focus on, we've got a lot of reading in class that we do. Focus on the reading we've done together and our understanding of that. Good. In terms of class participation, I don't assign you a class participation grade per se. But what I do is, at the end, when we're assigning final course grades, I look at your numbers, and if your mathematical grade comes out, I don't know, to 87, 88, 89, technically that's a B, but if you're somebody who's been engaged in class and talking and asking questions and thinking about the material, then I give you a little nudge up to the A grade, or up from a C to a B. Fair enough? We all good? Let's skip over the next few pages. We will come back to them. And go over to page 3 on the syllabus. Office hours and contact information. You can find their contact information. For me, phone, you have my email address already. Actually, I think my phone numbers are on the email. But there they are, and it gives your office hours. I want to stress that you're not limited to those office hours. If those don't work with you, I'm sure we can find another time to meet. Just reach out and make an appointment. I'll be more than happy to see you. I also should warn you something about my office hours. I try very hard to be there during office hours, but sometimes it doesn't work out well because I'm the department chair and I have to go and meet with deans and provosts and stuff, visit the dock tower over in JCK. Have you ever noticed the Nazguls circling? They look like buzzards, but they're really Nazguls. But this is where you laugh. This is the amusing, the joke part where I like things up.
It's a bird. Looks like a buzzard.
Have you seen Lord of the Rings, the movies? Seen Lord of the Rings, the movies are among my favorite movies. And so there's kind of the bad guys, the monsters. The Nazguls are sort of undead people who ride giant, fierce-looking birds or lizards of some kind, dinosaur-like things that eat people up. So that's between now and next class, you can work your way through the trilogy. How's that? So, but it's one of my all-time favorite books. It's a work of fiction. I've probably read it 15 times in my life, 20 times. And hope to read it another good 10 or 15 in the time that remains to me. But in any case, my joke crashed and burned. That's the point is, I have a lot of meetings, so sometimes I get summoned to a meeting, and it's kind of, here, watch another joke not land. The Godfather movies, makes you an offer you can't refuse. I frequently get those kind of offers from people over in JCK, where they say, hey, I wanted to invite you to chat, but they're not really inviting me. They're summoning me. So you have that, and so it's probably smart to check with me before you come over during office hours, or email me earlier in the day, just to make absolutely sure I haven't been absorbed into some kind of meeting or anything like that. You have all sorts of other fascinating reading on the syllabus that I'll rely for you to do on your own time. And so one thing I'd mention, some of the wording there is new, but it's standard university verbiage that they increasingly mandate and require. They use our words, not yours. But one thing I want to call attention to, is the AI stuff. So use of AI is prohibited in this class. I think it will increasingly is strictly prohibited for all assignments. So please keep that in mind as well. I want you to write your own papers and whatnot and to tackle the book on your own. As the recidivists in here know, and there's a number of people in here who've had me before, I will spend a lot of time going over reading with with you. I'm not just gonna throw a big book at you and say, sort this out. I will walk through it with you, but, work with me, and your own reading skills go back and forth. Don't go to AI to get some kind of paraphrase or something. So there is that. What else do I have to say? Attendance. Circling back to attendance, which is on page 1. The bottom line there is you really need to be in class. You need to be in class not because I'm keeping attendance records and I will dock you for missing a day. You need to be in class because the readings for this class are not easy. They are demanding. Okay, and I, again, will spend much of the class time walking you through reading, trying to help you get a handle on what he's trying to say and what those big, long sentences or big, complicated words mean. So if you don't attend class, you really place yourself at a disadvantage in terms of doing the paper. So don't do that. In terms of the reading, I would stress the input. This is a heavy reading course. On the other hand, there's no outside research. You're not writing some big long-term paper and stuff. But you need to do the reading. You need to try to stay on top of it. Now, I know and you know you're going to get behind at times. You're going to have a bad week and show up to class without having done the reading. And that's fine. I'm not going to throw a surprise quiz at you or anything like that. But the further you get behind on the readings, the harder it's going to be to get caught up again. So try to stay more or less on top. Get a week behind, catch up. Fair enough? Are we good? Any questions? Going once, going twice. Well, let us then, should look at my notes, see if I have something else jotted down here that I need to do now. What's jotted down here is let's go around and there are several of you I don't know in here. I suspect you all don't know each other. So let's go around the room. Give me your name. Give me where you did your undergraduate work, where you stand in our program. Are you a new student? Are you someone, in your second year or something like that? Just trying to get a sense of where everyone's coming from, what your favorite area of political science is. Because I assume everyone has a famous area of political science, right? So who wouldn't? That it was intended as a joke again. Okay, hand gestures. I'll go like this and you laugh, okay? I'm using the A humor today. So, this is the good stuff, so take advantage of it. It gets old. I have only a limited amount of material, as my own kids would tell you. Let us begin over here with this gentleman who I know, but you may all not know.
Hello, my name is Luke. My last semester, hopefully, in the graduate program here for political science. I went to Southwestern University, and that's...
What are you looking to do when you get out of here?
Oh, I've applied to some PhD programs. I got into one, by the way.
Which one?
Loughborough.
Okay, the one in England.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, their anarchist research program.
Okay. Very,
Um,
very good. That's a good place to begin with a yes rather than a no.
Yeah.
So that's encouraging news.
Yes.
Okay, very good. And what's your favorite area of political science, if you have one? I'm just trying to break ice here and get people chatting.
Probably the study of revolutions.
Okay.
Political sociology.
Okay.
Things like that.
Fair enough. This is sort of political sociology and you're a fair amount of it, so.
And I also like philosophy.
Okay, what philosophy do you take?
19th century philosophy.
Okay, well, that's your era, right? You're anarchist.
Yeah.
So that makes sense. Okay, very good. Keep me informed on the programs.
I'm Kennedy. This is my second semester in the program. What were the other questions?
Where'd you go as an
Oh,
undergrad?
I went here as an undergrad. I graduated two semesters ago. And then my favorite area of political science is probably like elections and kind of like why people vote the way they vote.
Okay. So what do you want to do when you leave these hallowed halls?
I'm still trying to figure that out.
Okay, and that's a fine answer, don't know, so. Okay, very good, well, welcome aboard. Sophia, I know you, but they don't necessarily.
Hi everyone, I'm Sophia Hernandez. My undergraduate was here at Texas State. I actually just graduated from it this past fall semester, so now I'm just a full-time grad student. Very exciting. This will be my second semester going into the graduate program, and my interest in politics is mainly the relation that it has with technology, which I was looking into something today that came across of surveillance pricing, where they're using cameras within your phones and stuff, like if you're doing online shopping, and they're changing like the prices from it based on like your history with like products that you've engaged with in the past, or if they're like more on the higher end and stuff like that, and that's very scary.
That is terrifying.
Yeah, and it's real. Like they actually have real research behind it and everything.
Happens with flights a lot.
Yeah.
Get your daughter.
I was that's exactly, she knows me, what I was thinking of. A college-age daughter who's constantly borrowing my credit card.
So
And I'm constantly finding difficulty paying her costs when she uses it. She's a big believer in DoorDash and Uber and expensive clothing, so.
And ICE uses drones to scan people's faces.
Yep.
Oh, yeah.
You know, what's coming down the pike is facial identification technology. They have a lot of that
Yeah,
in some countries now, and yeah.
And their database is huge because of the facial scanning they do at the airport.
Yeah.
Okay.
That gets uploaded to the DHS servers.
Yeah,
That is interesting.
another reason to be scared.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's interesting that you brought that up, because I went to Mexico for this past break, and
You can opt out of it though.
well, yeah, but we didn't know that. So the first time we got back, we got in the airport, but my brother got denied because they were like, "Oh, you're not in the system." But conveniently, no one was in the system, so we all had to scan our face anyways. So that was kind of interesting. But
Tell them I don't want to, and then they're like, okay.
well, now we know.
That's what happened.
Yeah.
But I'm sure
It's
they
a little
can-
too late for her.
Yeah.
You can get it other ways. so to speak.
Yeah.
Your driver's license picture.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the good thing is driver's license pictures sometimes don't look like us, so, you have trouble recognizing people from them. Okay, well, you've really depressed me. But that's fair. But on a different front, I need to talk about some Pi Sigma Alpha stuff, so grab me after class or on the break or something. You are, sir?
Hello everyone, I'm Rahul Shrestha. I'm from Nepal. It's been like 5 months here in US. It's my second semester here. And I graduated from Tribhuvan University back in Nepal. Course here is extremely difficult.
Wow.
And yeah,
Finding it challenging, you were saying?
Yeah.
Yeah.
it is.
Now, what did you take last semester?
Last semester, I
Just
took-
trying to get a sense of what you've encountered already to see how alike or different this might be.
oh, I took international theory. subs-
International
Relations,
conflict?
no, relations theory. And
What class? I missed that.
Doyle.
yeah,
International Relations Theory.
Okay. That's right. See, Dr. Maholkin used to teach that, and now it's Doyle. I forgot that. Okay.
His classes are hard.
Doyle was rough.
They're fun.
yeah, that was hard. That was the hardest I had. All the others were like fairly
What other classes did you have?
political research.
With Dr. Yoon?
Yes.
Okay.
And what other I had? I forgot.
DeHart.
Yeah, yes.
How do you do it? So 5301 with Dr. DeHart? How do you do in there?
I got A's.
Okay.
That's
You found Dr. Doyle harder.
no.
Now, Dr.
His class
who
was
the
fun.
hardest teacher you had last semester?
Professor Doyle.
Okay, Doyle. Okay, that's what I expected to hear.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, if at any point, yeah, I mean, at any point you're having trouble, you need help. You know, I'm not going anywhere. Plus you have as I like to say, I'm always here. Weekends, nights, and one of the assets you have in here, or the opportunities you have in here, are we have several recidivists. People have had my classes before, so they sort of have obviously in some respects the material is going to be new. This will have an overlap with last semester, maybe 20% at the beginning, and then branch off in new directions. But they know how my mind works, what I'm looking for on papers and stuff. So feel free to pick their brains as well. I mean, we're going to help people succeed.
Yes, sir.
And you, sir?
My name is Dylan. This is my second semester in the graduate program here. I went to James Madison University for my undergrad.
Who taught political science there? I have a sense.
So my undergrad was in philosophy.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I don't even remember the head of the department there at all. But
Okay. I'm thinking somehow I can't pull up a name that I know the people, at least some of the people at James Madison, like from the conference circle and things like that. But you poli-sci, not philosophy. Poli-sci is my world. Okay. And so this is your second semester here?
Yes.
What do you have last semester?
I had international relations with Dr. Doyle. I had approaches with DeHart, and the same class with Yoon, with him.
Okay. Oh, very good. Okay. When I'm in the room, they can tell you how I compare to those people, the folks who know me and stuff. I would ask them to say in front of me. Man, what brought you here from all the way in Virginia?
I don't know. Desperation, I guess.
What desperation? Okay.
No, I was looking for work, and I stayed with a friend in Austin. Then we got into a huge fight, and I was like, didn't find work, so I was like, I just got to go back to school. So.
Okay, there you go. There you go. Well, the coach from James Madison former coach, they won the national championship last night in college football. He was the coach of Indiana. That was the first college football game I've watched this season, but I did watch that game. So,
Isn't the Super Bowl in like a few weeks?
yeah, there's one more round of playoffs and then
You're
the
right,
Super
that's
Bowl.
what I
My dad was so sad when the Steelers got kicked out. So close.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, my wife hates the Steelers, so I can't say I secretly kind of like them. But I'm ultimately a Giant fan. She was an Oiler fan when they were the Houston Oilers. And there were a couple of years in a row where they met for the AFC Championship game, and the Oilers always lost. So she's very bitter about that, understandably. Her childhood team didn't make it through. So, and then they moved away to Tennessee. Amanda, you're up, I'm wondering.
Yes, I'm Amanda. This is my last semester in the graduate program.
Light at the end of the tunnel.
What else were we supposed to say?
Where did you graduate undergrad?
I finished my undergrad here at Texas State, but I started at Whittier College in LA, which is where Richard Nixon went to school. So my dad's favorite joke is that I've gone to the same schools as two different presidents. And
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
it's his favorite thing to tell people. And he goes, and she's gonna be in politics too. And I'm like,
I shouldn't repeat this line, but I'm going to take a chance and do it. We're the alma mater of Lyndon Johnson. And I was asked many years ago when I was young and knew, what's it like teaching Johnson's alma mater? And I said, he's present even today. He sets the moral, intellectual tone of campus life. So.
well, unfortunately at Whittier, the only thing that Nixon's legacy was doing is a lot of people flipping off his mural.
Oh, that's
I
unfortunate.
have too many drunk videos of my old friends there flipping him off.
Okay.
Every time.
There's no touch the hand
Yeah.
for good luck.
Right.
Yeah, there's no touch the hand. He's not gonna help you. It's keep it flip her off and get good luck. And hopefully, I like to focus on how social media affects elections, mainly at the state or federal level, and then how like the trickle down from that.
Okay.
But also just very general, anything relating to American presidency or Congress.
Okay. Very good. And Kate, you're up next.
I'm Kate.
Till you got into it. and
But I,
enjoyed it.
yeah, I really liked Chokeville. I was like, wait a second.
Well, we'll go back to Tocqueville, we'll repeat most of what we did last semester, probably cut a couple corners there, but, cause there's a lot more he said on the front of Religion that we barely stuck our toe in. We're gonna go back and go over that stuff, what he says there carefully, and spend some time on it, so that's good. How many people are graduating though? I'm sad.
A lot of those, like, a lot of the IA office is clearing out.
I know.
We were just talking about it this morning.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting next semester. I apologize.
That's okay, that's okay.
Like close
Remember, we
to
can always
cancer.
flunk a bunch of you guys to keep you ready.
I like that
We,
idea.
we wouldn't do that.
idea.
So, we wouldn't do that unless you want us to, so.
I wouldn't stay. I'd be like, well, I tried.
You should,
Oh.
you should extend it by another year, another semester.
Yeah,
It'll
make
Yeah,
it
see,
a
I,
year program.
see, my attitude is, I wanna stay in school for as long
Just offer.
as I possibly could.
Offer me a PhD and I'll stay for as long.
I was talking to somebody this morning, who won't let us do that yet.
There isn't PhD here, is there?
Nope.
Not in poli-sci, not in art department.
Gotcha.
There was going to be, around the time I became chair, that was the plan, but it got scuttled about a week into my chairmanship. I got called to meetings and, well, we told you guys you were getting a PhD. You're not, okay?
Psych.
And so that was fun. That was fun. Someday, inevitably, but I think that's someday. I think I will be retired by then.
Why did they deny the PhD option?
Okay, a variety of reasons. One is, there are a lot of PhDs or in political science or public administration offered at state institutions in Texas, so it's already, why one more when there are all these other places that already do it, because PhD programs are very expensive and a very serious commitment of resources. So that's number one. Number two is the PhD was gonna be focused on the public administration side, although some of the people on the poli-sci side, for example, we're gonna include American political culture in there. But there was a sense there were not enough demand for people with doctorates in PA. See, a doctorate in PA can help you get a job, but there are very, very few jobs that require it, where the lack of it prevents you from applying or having a crack at it, and there are just not a good investment of money, saying there's not an urgent enough need for this. Sure, you can produce people to teach PA, but there's really no big shortage of them. And beyond that, city managers and stuff, well, it can help you. It's a nice credential. It's good to put on your Vita if you're applying to be the city manager, Buda or something. They don't require that for those kind of jobs, or even listed as kind of preferred characteristic. So that was the rationale. It wasn't worth the investment of money, hard as that is for me to say. Isabel.
I'm Isabel. I also did my undergrad here, and I don't really have a preferred area of political science. Just have fun learning what I'm learning.
Okay, working with Professor Arnold again this semester?
Yeah.
Okay. And this is your second semester. I remember in your case, because you were a new IA for the fall, so that's okay. And now Dylan sort of has a foot in and a foot out here, but I will let Dylan introduce herself, because she's going to be here at least part of the time.
Yes. Hi, I'm Dylan. I'm actually in my 4th semester, technically, but I'll be probably extending my degree through the summer. I graduated with my bachelor's here in December of 2023, and then took a little bit of time to work and came back for my master's. Both in poli-sci. Love the department, love the people. My specialty, or my area of focus, I guess, is more like constitutional law, American founding theory, the influences that went into it. I'm actually writing my thesis on the Third Amendment right now and how that might be used to, as kind of a backdoor to modify the Constitution in the current political climate. So, yeah, I think did I get everything?
I think so, yeah. I think you basically covered it. So she's, to avoid confusion, she's Dylan with two N's.
Yes,
So,
you just Dylan.
I call on her Dylan with two N's to avoid confusion.
I'm actually gonna go reassure Dr. DeHart that I don't hate him.
Very good. We don't want him to think you hate him.
Yes.
He and I were both semi-traumatized.
Oh,
So Dylan's sort of sitting in but not taking the class.
I had to drop officially for financial aid reasons and add a minor in legal studies, but I'll be popping in and out, because I do enjoy Dr. Grasso's classes. He has some very funny jokes.
And she asks questions, which is good. We don't have her, without her and Ella Jane, it could be.
That's verbatim the sentence I said when I walked
Yes,
in the door.
Right,
as soon
you're-
as I told her.
Yeah. I relied on the two of them to get discussions going last semester.
I see all of you.
Very good. See you soon, Dylan. Okay, next question is on my agenda. Anyone have any questions for me? I'll open the floor. You've been telling me who you are. Obviously, I'm not as interesting as I thought. So,
Who are you, for those of us who don't know?
Where did you graduate?
I went to college where I grew up in New York. I didn't grow up in the city. I grew up in the suburbs of Long Island, which is why I have to go to the Texas coast a couple times a year. I go stir crazy. I grew up near the water. Growing up, I was never more than like a mile away from salt water, so it's a little hard to be landlocked here.
Like the Texas coast.
He likes salt water.
She's got the answer. It's salt. I have a T-shirt that said, "It may be brown, but it's salty." So, and I'll take that. So, got to try to find a weekend to get to the coast, so you couldn't go over Christmas. Did my graduate work at Fordham University, and stuff. That's where I got my doctorate. I've been down in Texas for the. Well, I guess I did 2 stints of duty here. I got here originally in 1985, taught for a year or 2, then left to take a position back east in beautiful New Jersey, the armpit of the universe. And then after a couple of years in New Jersey, I came back here again, and I've been here since '92 continuously and stuff. So I approach although I sound like a New Yorker, I can't lose the accent. I approach all things Texan with the fervor of a convert. I took a Texas history quiz at Texas Monthly once. My wife's a proud native Texan who's never lived anywhere else. And she got 100, I got a 96. So I thought it was pretty good for a guy from New York. So, that's sort of the scoop on me. My field, I'm interested in political theory / religion and politics / American political culture. I teach courses on religion and American politics and American political culture, and liberal political theory, and democratic political theory, and modern totalitarianism, and things like that. So that's a short version of me, and I should add that I spend most of my week filling out mindless paperwork, and being a soulless bureaucrat for Texas State. So the high point of my week is being here with you guys. If I look happy when I come in, I truly am, because I can do what I love with you guys. The rest of the week, not so much, but someone has to make the trains run on time. So that's a brief version on me. Anything else you want to know? Let's see if I have anything else. I guess that about covers it. So I want to get into the course and stuff like that. I don't just want to take a break now and give the day away. Oh, I know, I have to do one more thing. I knew I was overlooking something. Didn't feel right. On page 1 of this, you see it towards the very bottom, in the 5th of the page or something, tentative schedule. Okay, I want to emphasize the word tentative there. That's a week-by-week breakdown of what I plan on doing in here. Tells you the reading you have due for each class, gives you a sense of the lecture topics. I spent a lot of time putting this together, maybe hard to believe, but I spent many hours this past week on this, like an afternoon. And so there you have it. I stress tentative because in all my years of doing it, and I've been doing it for 35 years, I've never kept to one of these schedules. Okay? Never have succeeded. And I think actually we sort of malpractice to succeed in the sense that to some degree you have to let it go where the conversation's going and what people seem to be interested in and whatnot. So we will not be staying on this schedule, but I will alert you where we are. Each class, I will announce at the end of class or in an email after class, okay, here's where we're going next week and stuff. So that there are no surprises there. The schedule will give you a rough sense of the order in which we'll be doing the books. Schedule will give you a rough sense of when the papers are due. And you guys are at a big disadvantage this semester because Ella Jane last semester was really good at convincing me to give extensions, and she's not here now. So you're gonna have to argue for your own extensions now, not rely on her to do heavy lifting for everyone. Fair enough?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, if you have no questions for me, I have no alternative but to get down to business. And most of what I want to do today, I don't want to say consists of sound bites, because it's certainly a lot longer than a sound bite, but consists of a couple introductory things I want us to be able to talk about, together. But I can't go over exhaustively. They're, if you will, not the class, but they're background material assumed by the class that we're lurking in the background of what I say and what comes up in lecture and whatnot. So I want to simply begin with the notion of politics and consensus. I think it says something like that. Politics, religion, and consensus. For now, I want to talk about politics and consensus. I want to talk about what a functioning political society needs to run, needs to operate. Now, you can build a political society based on brute force. If I'm the head honcho and I have all the guns and tanks and airplanes, not to mention all sorts of cool surveillance things, right? Get a record of your face at airports and things like that, and track what you do on the internet. Okay, I can make a political society function with a big enough stick. I can scare people into obeying. But that's not a preferred way of doing business. Because societies that are purely external orders of command and assent, societies pulled together by brute force, they tend to be very unstable and they tend not to last long. Force isn't enough to make a society work. Maybe for a few days, maybe for a few years, maybe even for a few decades. But it falls apart. It ain't enough. And I have proof of this. And the proof is this. All the countries that are dictatorships, right? And say the old Soviet Union when it was alive and kicking, that old beast. They were not content simply to say, do this or we ship you to Siberia. They spent a lot of resources putting out propaganda, explaining to people that the government is actually your friends. And what they're asking you to do is something reasonable. And how they have a right to make these demands on you. They don't simply want to rely on brute force. They want to convince you to obey voluntarily. Okay, because you can't really have a soldier standing with a gun next to each person. That's too much in the way of resources. At the end of the day, voluntary obedience, at least on a large part of the population, is necessary. So they utilize propaganda to bolster the moral authority and the legitimacy of the government, to convince you that you have a duty to obey the government. It's the right thing to do, that it's in your interest, that what the government is asking you to do is reasonable and something you ought to want to do. So brute force ain't enough. Now what I want to say now, political society, there are a lot of preconditions to make a political society work. Brute force isn't enough, and if this were a different kind of force, we could talk about 15 different preconditions. It isn't that other kind of class, though. I gotta keep this brief. So I want to mention two things that are needed to enable a political society to run well, to be stable, to be sort of vigorous. The first of these things is a consensus, is a broad agreement. And we'll talk about what's involved in the agreement in just a minute. Okay? But a consensus, a broad agreement. And when I say a broad agreement, I don't mean everyone thinks this way. But you need the consensus means overwhelming majority, relatively few outliers. It's not 51% or 50.1%. It's 90%, 95%. And what I want to suggest, and I'm oversimplifying here, I know that, is that the consensus has two elements in it. So under number one consensus, we have an A or a B. Here's a little trick, by the way, before I slide back into content. My lectures generally take the form of outlines, where I'll say, here's a topic, there are 5 points under this topic, and maybe sub-points under those. When I'm saying consensus is number one, and there'll be an A and a B, that is hopefully useful information, because that's the format we'll generally use. Dimension A is a procedural agreement, a procedural consensus, if you prefer. Procedural consensus, what does that mean? We agree on the rules of the game. We agree on who the boss is that we have to listen to. We have this person or these persons are not simply giving advice, they're in charge. What they give us are commands. Commands we have a responsibility to obey. And so we have to agree on kind of the rules of the game. Who gets to make the binding decisions? How are the people who make the binding decisions chosen? So, say if we were living in an absolute monarchy, okay, it would be an agreement. Who's the king? Is the guy wearing the crown, does he have a right to be king? Is he lawfully the king? In an absolute monarchy, what he says goes, so that's nice and simple. He's the king, we shut up and do what he tells us, and he issues commands. He says jump, our only question is, how high, your majesty, and how long do you want us to stay up in the air? Okay, so in the United States, in the context of the United States, that would mean an agreement about the institutions bequeathed to us by the Constitution. There is a president. Here's how the president is chosen. Here are the president's powers. There is a Congress. Because don't forget, if you look at the Constitution, half the Constitution is just Congress. The presidency and the other branches are, they just get like a half page, a page. Congress is where the power lies, if it chooses to use it. So it tells you here, Congress consists of 2 houses. Here's how you get elected to one of these houses. Here's what the term in office is like. Here's how each of the houses is organized, and the courts. Here's how you become the judge. Here's how that works. So you need a procedural agreement, because if we can't agree who's in charge, it's going to be very hard to have unified action. Okay, if I think Amanda's in charge and Luke over here thinks Sophia is in charge, we have a problem. politically. Okay?
No one's in charge.
Well, no one in effect is in charge then, right? And then we have anarchy, which I know you're a fan of, but I'm not. Okay? So we have the procedural consensus. That's easy. That's shooting, that's shooting fish in a barrel. But part B under consensus is substantive consensus. And that's the more important term here. Yeah, so, I mean, I don't want to minimize what procedural consensus is, but it's simpler. Substantive consensus is bigger, more complicated. Alternate name for substantive consensus, because it's going to be called by different names in different things you read. Some authors will call it public consensus. Some will call it public philosophy. Some will call it civil religion, which I think is not a fortunate name. But that term is sometimes used by people in the field. Sometimes it's called background consensus. And there are, I almost missed public culture. Wouldn't want to forget old public culture. So there are lots of different names, and people call it by different names, but they all boil down to essentially, there's some fuzziness about the details, but all those things designate pretty much the same thing. That's kind of a broad agreement about who we are, what our commitments are, what are our goals as a community organized for action in history, because having a government means being organized, right? So what are our goals? What are our objectives? What is our what are we trying to achieve as a society? How do we determine if we're succeeding and failing? What are our values? What are our ideals? What are the principles upon which we're trying to build our public life? So this substantive consensus is normative in nature. It includes principles, values, understandings of right and wrong, good and bad. And in a minute, I will read you some passages on this subject from some of your readings for today. It's almost like I had a plan when I assigned you these readings, that they're not random. That's a smile line, guys. We're having fun. So serious. Okay, I mean, when they think hard yet, all that stuff's still coming, then you should look serious. What was I going to say? Let me give you an example to illustrate it. And those who are the recidivists have heard variations on this example before. Imagine we have 4 people from this class. I won't assign names. And suppose we chain them together at the wrist, so they're attached to one another. We give them each, say, 10 feet of chain so they can go to the bathroom by themselves. And we tell them, congratulations, you are spending your Friday night together. Now, there's no choice. You're locked together. You've got to do the same thing because there's no other way of going about it. One person wants to go up to 6th Street and party on Friday night. Right, party night. It's Friday night. Blow off steam from the first night of class. Let's go up to Austin and have some fun. So, when I was a student, I was more prone to go to libraries on a Friday night, but I was a little strange. Second person is into sports. And there's a big, we'll say, basketball game, because football, NFL, college football's over and the NFL playoffs are on weekend. Has a huge basketball game they really are desperate to see. And they want to be at home in front of their 60-inch TV screen watching this basketball game. They're passionate fans and whatnot. Another person says, gee, that all sounds well and good, but I got to make a tuition installment payment. I gotta work this weekend, I'm going to the office, I'm gonna work. That may stink compared to football and 6th Street, but it is the way it is. And then the final person wants to stay home and do the reading in this course on Friday night. Okay, you know who my favorite person would be. But in any case, they want 4 different things. And it's very hard to achieve these things at the same time. Maybe you could go to a sports bar and make the partier and basketball guy happy. But even there, loud crowds, lots of noise, inability to concentrate on game and stuff. They want 4 different things. What do? I see no way where a lot of people don't end up unhappy in this scenario. There are going to be people who end up seriously unhappy. The person who wants to go to work may be furious. I'm going to get fired if I don't show up on Friday night. I'm not going to be able to pay my tuition, and I'll miss out on this exciting class with Dr. Grasso. The person who wants to study says, well, I need to get ahead on my studying. There's a ton of reading in this course. This guy assigns a crazy amount of reading. And I need to get ahead. It's interesting stuff, and I need to get ahead. A long semester ahead of us. People are going to end up here unhappy. You can even imagine some bad feelings. The loser is the person who really wanted to see that game. They may be really ticked if that's not what you do. The person who loses their job, they may be absolutely irate. You see in that scenario, people end up hating one another, right? Becoming mortal enemies. Point is, political society is like that sort of little, I don't know what you want to call it, little scenario I've outlined. We're stuck together. I mean, you always talk about secession at the margins and things like that. We're basically stuck together. Okay? And if we want fundamentally different and incompatible things, we're really going to be miserable. And we're really going to end up hating each other. And this whole thing may fall apart, become totally dysfunctional. And that's even without a group of people saying, I'm leaving. I want to, we're seceding. Remember, that has happened in American political history. Think the Civil War. There have been numerous times in American history where state governments have attempted to nullify federal laws to prevent their enforcement. Going back to the days of Andrew Jackson in South Carolina, when it announced it would not enforce U.S. tariff laws, and General Jackson, as he was prone, said, well, the Army might have something to say about that. Decide quickly, because we're going to march. So, for political society to really run, people have to have kind of broadly common, broadly compatible objectives. They have to have certain values and priorities and goals in common. If we're all going to go somewhere together, we need to agree about the goal, or we're going to have a lot of unhappy passengers in this ship. And what I mean by substantive consensus is an agreement on those. You can say agreement on principles, values. You can say an agreement on the substance of the common good, what the common good actually means. You can say an agreement on goals and purposes and whatnot. You phrase it all sorts of different ways. And it's all these things and more. Okay? So you need that kind of substantive agreement, or society is going to have trouble cohering. Now, before I read you some quotes to show you where authors talk about this, at least initially, we'll circle back later. This doesn't mean we have to agree about everything. Societies are going to house different people, and people are going to have disagreements. It's not we're all going to think exactly alike. If we all thought exactly alike, you wouldn't even need government, because we just all spontaneously do the same thing without any, without the government having said, this is what we're gonna do, fellas, this is the law. These are not helpful suggestions, they're not advice. They're things you are commanded to do. But there has to be a common core, there has to be this overlapping agreement to pull the whole thing together. If we can't agree on any common goals, it can't possibly work. If we don't agree about anything, you don't have a community. You have a group of individuals, and what do you do with that? That's defined as anarchy. That's defined as an absence of order. So it doesn't mean complete, total agreement. It doesn't mean we're on the same page about everything. But it means a substantial amount of commonality, a substantial amount of, there's a Greek term I will give you, because you don't need it, but meaning like-mindedness. Okay, like-mindedness, that'd be the term that, say if you read Plato and Aristotle, you would encounter that concept. Let me read you some passages. We'll begin with some passages in Canavan. And these break no new ground, really. I'm just showing you in the readings where you see what I have here. Let's go to page 100. Okay? Page 100, next to last full paragraph on the page. Are most of you work, I'm just curious, are most of you, I see you got a hard copy. Are you guys dealing with online copies of Canavan? Because some people on the computer. Okay, and that's fine either way. It just helps me know what people are looking at, so give you time to look things up and stuff. Page 100, second to last paragraph. A viable society depends on more than agreement on the formal rules of the game. Paraphrase, more than a procedural consensus. In the accommodations that it makes among its constituent communities, among different people and groups who live there, it trades constantly on consensus. The accommodations work because of the substantive moral, cultural, and political convictions which the people still share and which underline and contain their disagreements. Different communities can live together as constituent parts of a larger national society only to the extent they are held together by more than merely legal and material bonds. Otherwise, they split apart like Greeks and Turks on Cyprus, or live uneasily together in a relationship characterized by arrogance and fear on one side and festering resentment on the other. To this situation, no set of merely formal rules or bills of individual rights can be adequate. And then we move over to page 107, where it basically makes the same point in a slightly different way. The Constitution is our legal framework as a nation, but no mere legal document can create or maintain unity in diversity if the necessary social conditions for it are lacking. Cyprus divided between Greek Christians and Muslim Turks, Lebanon rent by multi-sided strife among Christians and Muslims and their subdivisions, and Northern Ireland, where the legitimacy of the state itself is a political issue. Prove the point. Even such stable political systems as those of India, Canada, and Belgium illustrate the difficulty of uniting a people sharply divided by religion and or language. The constitution of a country can be a potent force in unifying it, but there is an antecedent unity upon which it must depend. I'm going to have to flip pages here because I don't remember the page sites in Hunter. And I hope I did write them down. Good, I got scared when I didn't write them down. what you read for today, we're going to read excerpts from 2 books by a guy named James Davison Hunter. One book is called Democracy and Solidarity, and it's the reading chat for today. Later we'll do excerpts from another book of his, that this is a sequel to an earlier book. We'll look at the earlier book, and that we'll spend more time on. But if you go over to page 10, then again, I'm taking a moment for people to find where they need to be.
Which book was this?
It was a canvas reading from Democracy and Solidarity by Hunter. By the way, if ever, rule of thumb for the newcomers, if ever I'm speaking too fast or losing you, slow me down or stop me. Don't ever be shy about putting up your hands and ask a question or ask me to slow down or something. That's fine. First full paragraph on page 10 of Democracy and Solidarity. The power of culture is the power to define reality. Then the power of culture is measured by the degree to which its meanings are taken for granted. Skipping down into the last paragraph on the page, 3rd line. Culture provides an implicit view of the nature of reality, the nature of knowledge, how we come to know things, the nature of human persons with whom we live, the nature of our social obligations, and not least the ends toward which meaningful individual and collective action is oriented. Every culture implicitly poses and addresses in various ways these proto-philosophical questions. The questions of metaphysics, epistemology, anthropology, ethics, and teleology. And at various points in the reading from Hunter, he gives different names for, I'm talking substantive consensus. Canavan just called it consensus. Hunter on page 11 calls it social imaginary, about 10 lines down on the page. And then I'm trying to look for another one. This is going to be later. Hopefully I can find it quickly, because this page I failed to write down. And this is going to be a long one. It's a long chapter. And I'm looking for a spot. On page 47, right? The first full paragraph page, he says, some people call what we're talking about implicitly recognized basic ideas and principles. Another guy calls it a background consensus, continuing down that paragraph. Still another guy calls it a public philosophy, the political theory implicit in our practice, the assumptions about citizenship and freedom that inform our public life. At another point, I think I slipped past it, he says sometimes it's called civil religion. Hunter's preferred term, here is page 35, civil religion, is public culture. But his public culture basically is our substantive consensus with slightly different kind of emphases and stuff. You with me? Okay. Next stop, let me see if I find a passage in Tocqueville on this. And this one I forgot to look for in advance, so this could be. I found it. I dog-eared the page. On another semester, fortunately. Page 373 in the Tocqueville book. I'm in the middle of the page. There's all these little paragraphs. This paragraph begins with what keeps a great number. It's a little under halfway down the page, maybe more than a third, less than a half. What keeps a great number of citizens under the same government is much less a reasoned desire to remain united than the instinctive and, in a sense, involuntary accord which springs from the feelings and similar opinions. I would never admit that men form a society simply by recognizing the same leader and obeying the same law. Only when certain men consider a great many questions from the same point of view and have the same opinions on a great many subjects, and when the same events give rise to like thoughts and impressions, is there a society. And then he uses America, that's what he's talking about, to illustrate this. America, they have all these states, and they're all spread out over to what Europeans is this vast territory. Keep in mind how much bigger the U.S. is. I think you can fit each individual country in Europe into Texas. But he's talking about the size of the United States. But although it's spread out, you have all these different states, nevertheless, the United States constitute a single nation. This is in the next paragraph. And perhaps he will even come to think that the Anglo-American Union is a reality more of a united society than some European nations living under the same laws and prince. Although there are many sects among the United Anglo-Americans, they all look at religion from the same point of view. They do not always agree about the best means of governing, and they have varied views about some of the forms of government expedient to adopt. But they all agree about the general principles which should rule human society. From Maine to the Floridas, from Missouri to the Atlantic Ocean. Look, he's not thinking of the Pacific Ocean because there wasn't, we weren't out there yet. They all think alike. They all think alike about politics. He listed things they agree about. And then the next page he said, if returned to philosophical and moral opinions controlling the daily actions of life and the general lines of behavior, we find the same agreement. And then he says, skipping down after that bigger paragraph, I do not assert that all these opinions are correct, but that they are American. The Americans are united by common ideas. So again, a stable, vigor, the vitality and stability of a political society depends upon having both a procedural consensus and a substantive consensus. Now I said that was consensus for number one. Number two, I will do more quickly. It's solidarity. And the Hunter reading you just did is sort of funny. If you read it carefully, you may have noticed this. Maybe not, since I read it like 5 times, I sort of know it. But over and over again he says, let's not talk about consensus. What really matters is solidarity. Hence the title of the book, Democracy and Solidarity. He said, some people would say this should have been called Democracy and Consensus, but I think it should be called Democracy and Solidarity. But when you start talking about solidarity, as he does a great deal in the little portions you read and in the whole book, turns out solidarity depends upon agreement. It goes back to some sort of consensus. The big reason, honestly, why he doesn't like the word consensus, he implies I can turn to you. Consensus, he thinks, implies, okay, people, I want you to list the 10 things in the American consensus. You have 10 minutes, make a list. That is all thought out, and we've memorized this kind of formal creed that we have. And his point is, as he said in the stuff I read you about culture there, implicit, unarticulated, taken for granted, just assumed. It's like you assume fish don't see water, right? It's what they live in, just like you and I don't see air. But it's the very air we live in. We take it for granted. All these broad elements of agreement that we're all, as Americans, despite all our many differences, on the same page. in a certain sense, that there is this common core of agreement that unites us amidst all the disagreement. And a question I'm going to try to reflect on towards the end of the semester, bring us around to. Semester's a long time, so it'll be a while before we get there. Is today, are we witnessing the fraying of the procedural and substantive consensus? And also the fraying of the other thing I'm listing, solidarity. By solidarity, he means this sense of unity. This sense, I'm going to say brotherhood here, although that was not a great choice of words. Because, we don't feel about our fellow Americans the way we feel about our brothers and sisters, presumably. There's a little difference there. But there's the sense we're all Americans, we're all in this together. We are not the French, we are not the English, we are not the Chinese. We are Americans. We are citizens of the same republic. People are fellow citizens, so the sense of solidarity, of kind of mutual support and mutual commitment. Aristotle, the Aristotelian phrase is civic amity. Amity being a fancy word for friendship. He doesn't just say friendship, because my friendship with my best friend is different from my friendship with an American who lives in Iowa or something, whose name I don't know and who I've never met. But it's a connection. We're all part of this thing together. And the way I like to address this, and I don't know if this works for people or not, but this example was helpful for me way back when I was young. Sitting in the room listening to lectures and stuff, is let's think of a football team here. A successful football team, a winning football team. Let's just say Indiana from last night, just because that's fresh on our minds. The players on a football team are not necessarily the best friends. It may be that the best friend of the friends of the right tackle don't play football at all. They're outside of the football program, they do something else. But there's in a sense where a successful team is united by friendship. You might use the phrase team spirit, right? All for one and all for one and one for all. We're all in this together. We're a band of brethren. You saw that HBO series, Band of Brethren? I only saw that like a year ago. That was absolutely amazing. I want to watch it again. One of the best things I've ever seen. But we're a band of brethren. The sense of communal solidarity, mutual support, loyalty to one another, and stuff. And this manifests let's say with the football team for example. The offensive linemen let's just say now we'll go to the left tackle. We did the right tackle. The left tackle might say, the quarterback is really grating. That guy is really annoying and, kind of ticks me off. I'm glad I don't have to, eat lunch with him every day and stuff. But when the defense tries to get at the quarterback, what does that left tackle do? He lays down his body if necessary to protect the quarterback. There's a friendship there, or if you will, a partnership. That's a good word I was trying to pull up. Partnership in a common enterprise. I'm stealing that from Gerhard Niemeyer, not that that matters, but just came to me where I read that word 40 years ago. In any case, it's a sense of partnership in a common enterprise. Just like a football team needs that sense of communal solidarity, team spirit. We work together, we have different jobs, even if it's a disagreement. But we're all in this together for a common goal. We work together, we win together, and we lose together. The old cliche, there's no I in team. A political society requires that kind of sense of solidarity. political society is going to have lots of different individuals in it. And beyond individuals, it's going to have all kinds of groups in it. They may be, kind of economic groups, middle class versus working class. Okay, it may be occupational groups, corn farmers versus auto workers. It may be ethnic or racial. It may be religious in nature. But if a political society is going to work despite all those differences, there has to be this sense of solidarity that we're all working together, that we're partners in pursuing a common goal. If the offensive lineman said, I don't care what the hell happens to the quarterback, he's a jerk, that team will not win. Okay? It's that simple. So there has to be, despite whatever personal feelings or disagreements we might have, there has to be a sense there's an overriding commonality. We're all Americans here. In an American context, the sense of something mutual support, willing to make sacrifices for others, willing to make sacrifices for others, willing to meet others halfway in the case of disagreement to keep things working, a willingness to meet each other halfway. A willingness to voluntarily do the right thing, even without coercion. Even without coercion, even without force, or fear of a fine or something like that. A willingness, again, a sense of partnership, that you will the good of everyone in the community. You may not really like them personally, you may not want to go out to lunch with them or something, but you will their good and their well-being, and you're going to work for that, along with your well-being as an individual, as well as the well-being of any group we are part of. Okay? Is this kind of clear? Am I beating a dead horse? Or I'm good. Got a thumb up from Sophia, so unless I get some other feedback, I'm going to say I've done the job there. I guess I've done the job. Tell you what, we've talked, so a society work requires consensus, both procedural and substantive, and a sense of solidarity, a sense of mutual support. We together. This is a nice time to take a break. My watch says 5 o'clock. I'm not sure it's right, but it's the official time. 5:01. Let us circle back here at 5:16 or 5:15 on my watch. Fair enough. Get some food, go to the bathroom, whatever you need to do. Check your email. I'm going to go back and see how many thousands of email have made their way into my computer in this time.
Your office.
I saw smiles and signs of happiness and interesting conversations, and I feel somewhat guilty here, like I'm a party pooper. I'm coming in to ruin everyone's good time, but we must get down to business. And remember I said that we're going to do some introductory stuff, and so we had that. We talked there about political life and political society and consensus, and I skipped over the religion part. And now we'll turn our attention to the religious side of the equation. And that will involve looking at, to give you a heads up, the Oakley little reading I put on Canvas from Francis Oakley. Did I not give you that for today?
No.
That will be for next time, then. I messed up. That's right, that was, right. Yeah, I should have dropped the Tocqueville and put the Oakley there. It was rearranging it and forgot. But you can look at it for next time, that's fine. The big takeaway here is we Americans, we tend to think of religion and politics as kind of different categories. They're sort of different worlds. And there are those among us who say they need to be kept completely separate, that if you mix them together, it's bad, it's wrong, bad things happen. There are other people who say, well, of course, they're in some way interrelated, there's some connections there. But again, we tend to think of them as different things, different, unconnected, unrelated enterprises. Yes?
In the French system, don't they call it the total separation? Is it like laïcité or something
Yes,
like that?
that's exactly what they call it. Okay, but I need to say a bunch of things about this. There are some things that need to get clarified. But a couple things. First thing I need to say is that if you think about it for a moment, it's hard to imagine how you separate, at least totally separate, totally compartmentalize religion and politics. It would seem like almost there has to be some influence there. Just think about it conceptually. Okay, think about it conceptually. Politics is about, you might say broadly, and somewhat vacuously, but broadly, organizing our common life together. It's how we live together. The set of rules that we as a community follow, that we all live by. Religion, on the other hand, speaking loosely, we'll come back later in the semester to have different definitions of religion and stuff. One of your books discusses that. Religion, you might broadly say, is the ultimate meaning and purpose. Ultimate meaning and purpose of the universe, ultimate meaning and purpose of human beings. And if you think about it that way, it's hard to separate them. Politics concerns ordering our life together. Well, how our life together ought to be ordered, how it ought to be organized, depends on what we think a human being is, how we understand human beings. Depends on our conception of what a human being is. What the human good consists in. What the ultimate purpose of human life is. Where government and politics falls into that scheme of the ultimate purpose of human life. I mean, it seems to me that it's impossible to completely separate those things conceptually, because our religion our view of what a human being is and what human life is all about is necessarily going to affect our view of how human beings should live together. They got to be connected in some way, because what we think a human being is going to affect how we think a human being should live. And so I used to, for an undergraduate course I teach, used to use a silly little example of this that paints a very broad brushstroke. But suppose, what's your name again? Kennedy, and I know Sophia, so I'll rely on you guys. I've been looking over this way too much, so I want to pay attention to you guys. I don't want Luke to feel neglected. He strategically sat in the blind spot where he gets very little attention. He falls out of my sphere of vision. But in any case, let us pretend that Kennedy is going away for a couple weeks. Let us pretend that Kennedy has a pet. And this pet is very near and dear to her. It's very important to her. She has a deep attachment to the pet. And she says to Sophia, while I'm gone, will you take care of my pet for me? Good care of my pet. I really love this pet. Be good to it. And stuff. What questions might Sophia ask?
When does the pet
Even when does the what?
when does the pet eat?
There might even be a more fundamental question if you think about it. I've intentionally been vague. What's your pet? If her pet's a horse, that's a lot different than if her pet is a goldfish. Okay? The point is how you take care of it right, is going to differ radically depending on how you understand the thing. To use a fancy technical terminology, different anthropologies are going to give you different kinds of politics. One understanding of man, what a human being is, what human life is about, puts you in Nazi Germany. Another understanding what a human being is puts you in the U.S. in, say, 1776. Okay? So, the politics is going to be shaped by anthropology, by our theory of human nature, and different anthropology is going to produce different politics, and different religions, to the extent that they understand human beings differently, and they in fact do understand human beings differently, are going to affect the shape, the fabric, the contour of political life. Again, you can't just conceptually shape what you understand human life to be about from how you think human beings should live. That would make no sense at all. It'd be like Sophia sitting down and coming up for a plan to take care of Kennedy's pet without knowing what type of pet it is. And if she shows up with goldfish food and it's a horse, well, things aren't going to work out very well. And see what happens when she tries to exercise the goldfish, on the other hand. Might not work out well. My kids did all those kind of things. You find a kid's fish in its pocket and stuff. It looked lonely. When my kids were real little, like 4 of them. My kids have done everything. Okay. They're like a wrecking crew. The old rule from one of my old teachers, you can't devise a foolproof system. Why? Fools are too ingenious. There's a million ways of doing something wrong. There's a limited number of ways of doing it. Right. For example, I think, this is a slight digression, but most of you have heard the story before. I think about the day my daughter raced through a yield sign and almost got us killed and told me she had no choice. She's busy driving. There's no time to read when you drive. Sigh. And I live with this every day. Well, actually, there is a point of reading when you drive. But in any case, back to the religion. They're obviously some way, shape, or form connected. You can't just completely compartmentalize them, even though you may try to. However hard, you just end up engaging what one author called smuggling. You bring in notions you don't acknowledge any connection. Meantime, you're acting as though there's a connection. You bring it in quietly without mentioning it. It lurks in the background. So that's point number one under religion and politics, the intrinsic connection. Number two, although they are, I think, necessarily connected, I would say that religion and politics are nonetheless somewhat different things. There's a connection, but they're somewhat different enterprises. But here's the thing, and here is the rub. Not everyone thinks like I do. Not everyone agrees with me, as disappointing as that is. If you go back to classical antiquity, you go back to the oldest form of post-tribal human social life. You find a form that's got a social life that some people call the cosmological empires. Ancient Egypt would be an example that's sort of familiar to us of a cosmological empire. I'll talk about what that means in a minute. I know how to define it. But ancient Sumeria, ancient Mesopotamia, ancient North and South America, ancient China, ancient Vietnam. When you go back historically, societies tend to be organized almost universally as cosmological empires. Now let me read you what does that imply politically? That's obviously a good question. Let me try to circle ahead. Yeah, I went a little too far. Yeah, I don't want to do that. Let's see. Page 12. I'll just go to the last paragraph. I'm going to read you something longer. This is Oakley. At the very heart of primitive and antique politics, then, lay religion. So much so, indeed, that for the greater part of human history, it is an egregious anachronism even to make use of those words, the very definitions of which presuppose our modern Western distinction between the religious and the political. Next paragraph, he's quoting another scholar. Great book, by the way, Kingship and the Gods in the Ancient Near East. A really valuable work. If we refer to kingship as a political institution, we assume a point of view which would have been incomprehensible to the ancients. We imply that the human polity can be considered by itself. The ancients, however, experienced human life as part of a widely spreading network of connections which reached beyond the local and national communities into the hidden depths of nature and the powers that rule nature. The purely secular was the purely trivial. Whatever was significant was embedded in the life of the cosmos. It was precisely the king's function to maintain the harmony of that integration. The ancient kings then were regarded as sacred figures, almost priestly, usually divine. And divine kingship, with all that it involved, has been described as the archetypical pattern of archaic culture, which underlies all the ancient civilizations of the world. Evidence for existence is broadcast across the globe in regions as far different from another as China and West Africa, Scandinavia and Polynesia, India and Peru, Ireland, and the Nilotic, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, Sudan. Skipping down to the very end of the page, evidence for the existence of the divine or sacred monarchy is broadcast not only across the globe, but across an extraordinary span of time, pointing back to those prehistoric chiefs and medicine men whose power over the phenomenon of nature had enlarged their dominion in reaching forward to the modern sacred monarchs of Polynesia, of Africa, of Central and South America, of Asia. Right down to the 20th century, it remained the sacred duty of the Chinese emperor, himself the son of heaven, quote unquote, to harmonize and coordinate the orders of heaven, nature, and society by scrupulous performance of a cycle of traditional ritual rites. As recently as 1899, an imperial decree appeared in which the emperor attributed the current drought to his own sins. And it was only in 1912 that the great altar of heaven to the south of Peking, now Beijing, ceased to witness the annual sacrifice offered by the Son of Heaven at the winter solstice. The same cult was practiced until 1915 in the Vietnamese imperial capital. Similarly, in what is now Western Nigeria, the Onai, or one-time priest king, when interviewed in the 1930s, objected to the abolition of certain sacrifices on the ground that they were necessary not merely for the life of the whole world, were necessary not only merely for the iffy, but for the whole world, and that their interruption might have a disastrous effect. You go back to the ancient, the oldest form of civilization we have, takes the form of a cosmological empire. The emperor, the ruler, is frequently designated as a priest. He's simultaneously both a priest and king. Often, as a matter of fact, designated himself as a living god. See the Pharaoh of ancient Egypt as an example. And a big part of the ruler's responsibility was the performance of certain religious rites, the performance of certain religious rituals. They weren't like a peripheral thing he did ceremonially. They were the core of the job. Yeah, the emperor raised taxes. The emperor wrote laws. The emperor, directed wars and stuff. Those were part of his job as well, but they were the secondary part of his job. The most important thing he did was the performance of certain religious rituals. And that's connected up with the nature of what's called cosmological religion, the type of religion that very much predominated at that stage in human history all over the globe. And that's something we'll come back to later if we have time, have it down as sort of an optional topic, and discuss that a little more related to more contemporary things. So if you were to go back and ask the Pharaoh, do you distinguish between religion and politics? He would look at you with a blank stare. They had no separate word for religion and no separate word for politics. They were understood as the same thing. And I want to stress it's hard for us to understand. It's not that he had two jobs. It was understood as one integral job. His role was as much religious, what we call religious, as it is what we would call political, maybe even more so. And that was the hallmark of these ancient empires, and again, all over the place, across the globe. It wasn't, the Egyptians did this weird thing. No, they did the normal thing with their own little twists and stuff. That was how you organized social life. Going back as far as we have historical records, going back to the first civilizations, that is what they encounter. And they make no distinction between what we call religion and politics. They don't even have different names for them. And you see this played out in the ancient Greeks. You go to Plato and Aristotle and say, do you guys want to separate church and state, or alternatively, do you think religion and politics are different things? They would look at you like you are crazy. Because again, they didn't have separate words. For the Greece of Plato and Aristotle, for that very important period in the emergence of this thing we call Western civilization that we inhabit, no such distinction was made. A lot of times they'll say Plato and Aristotle talk about the city-state. They never talked about a city-state. That's a mistranslation, bad translation. They talked about a particular, they talked about the polis. Aristotle's always quoted as saying, man is a political animal. No, he didn't say that. He said man is a polis animal. Man is the animal who's meant to live in the polis. And like the ancient empires that went before them, the polis was combined religion and politics as an undifferentiated whole. They made no distinction. You read the Republic. Plato's laying out a plan for what we say, good political or good city state. We just said a good polis, the rightly ordered polis. One of the first things he deals with is speech about the gods, or as he said, theology. That's where the term theology originates, in Plato. Okay? He says, first thing you got to do if you're setting up a polis is determine how it will speak about the gods, because that's the most important thing it does, is speak about the gods. That's foundational and fundamental. When Aristotle, normally it's printed as book 7, sometimes they reorder the book. When Aristotle in the Politics talks about, a well-ordered polis at the end of the book, after discussing all sorts of different types of polises and stuff, he lists, well, what does a polis do? You look at the list, worship the gods, take care of divine worship. In the ancient world, there was no distinction between what you and I would call religion and what you and I would call politics. Again, They're referred to by the same name. They didn't have those concepts. It's not that they combined religion and politics. They didn't understand there was anything different. There was one ball of wax. It's almost so I like to envision it. You take religion and politics and pretend they're hard wax balls. You melt them down, you mix them together so they completely mingle. That's what they did. It wasn't religion here, politics there. It was one undifferentiated whole. You go back to ancient Rome. What were the titles of the emperor, you ask? Among his titles was High King, translated into English, but among his titles was High Priest, because the emperor was expected to perform certain religious rites, certain religious rituals. Neither the Romans nor the Greeks made any distinction between what you and I would call state and what you and I would call church. Again, they didn't have the concept, so between religion and politics. So when does this distinction, this is all in Oakley, when does this distinction emerge, you said? Well, it emerges in one particular place of what we've now come to call Western civilization. And it originates under the impact of a particular religious system. That religious system is what is known as Christianity. Recall 3 of the Gospels, the so-called Synoptic Gospels, I think it's all 3, I'm working from memory, I didn't look, tell a story about Jesus. It's sometimes called the story of Caesar's coin. Okay, guy tries to trick Jesus, get him into trouble. He says it's lawful to pay taxes to Caesar, to the Roman emperor. Dangerous, dangerous question. So he says, no, don't pay taxes. He'll be arrested and executed by the Romans. He says, pay your taxes to Caesar, sure. Then the Israelites hate him. There's no kind of good answer. They're trying to trap him in a way that badly alienates someone. And his response is he asks them to show him a coin, and what does he say? Whose picture's on the coin? Caesar's. Oh, well then render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, give Caesar what is Caesar's, and give God what is God's. Now he didn't answer the question. He didn't say it was lawful to pay taxes. He was ducking the question. But in that notion, things of Caesar's and things of God, you begin to get an embryonic distinction there between what we're calling religion and what we're calling politics. And this distinction very slowly and gradually kind of takes form. It isn't like, oh, we said that religion and politics are different. Got it. Got the message. It takes hundreds and thousands of years to sort itself out. If it is even completely sorted out, which I'm very much not sure of. But the embryonic notion that there is the things of God are different from the things of Caesar. The things of God are different from the things of the government, Caesar being the representative of the political power. And then that develops over time into a distinction between not just concepts, but institutions. You get a distinction between state. The concept of a state emerges, which is different than a polis. And on the other, opposed to state, you have church. That's how the distinction between church and state and religion and politics emerges over a long time amid a tremendous amount of conflict, because the initial move is try to fit Christianity into the form of ancient civilization. Okay, well, the emperor will be in charge of Christians, the new religion. The emperor is the religious leader. He's in charge, and you see that once the empire begins to Christianize, the emperor suddenly points, well, I'm the leader of the church, I make the religious decisions too. But over time, that becomes controversial and leads, a lot, you could write a whole history of Western politics from, say, 400 AD, let's just say 1800, we're having a date there, focused on the distinction between church and state and religion and politics, because a lot of Western politics and a lot of Western political conflict revolves around those concepts. How do we institutionalize it? What does it mean in practice? Some things go to God, some things go to Caesar. Okay, that sounds easy. But when you try to figure out what things go to God and what things go to Caesar, it turns out to be really hard to figure out and really hard to determine where you draw that line. If there even is a line to be drawn there. Again, going back to what I said, you said, going back to what I said a minute ago, these distinctions emerge, ironically, the distinction between religion and politics emerges under the auspices of a particular religious tradition at a particular time and place. It's a peculiarity of this thing we call Western civilization. Didn't happen in the Eastern Roman Empire. They kept the old sacral monarchy. They had to do some revisions. The ruler could no longer be God, but the emperor in the East was understood as head of the church. But it didn't play itself out that way in the West. It precipitated endless argument and endless discussion of this topic. Okay, there's more to be said about it. I've laid the groundwork for a few comments here, but Luke had his hand up.
I have to mention that many anarchist Christians have talked about how the rendered to Caesar was due to Caesar is taken out of context. Because many times throughout the Bible, Jesus has talked about how everything is given to God. Everything on earth is God's.
Right.
And so, like you said, he was avoiding to answer the question in a damning way. And so when we consider the first part of what I just said, when we listen to him say, give to Caesar what's due Caesar, and give to God, he said, give to God what's due God, then you understand he's saying everything is due to God, nothing is due to Caesar. But he couldn't say that because then he would have been arrested prematurely.
Okay, let me respond to that. First of all, yes, from the point of view of Christian theology, everything belongs to God. There's no question about that. That's foundational. God is sovereign over all. But, now comes the but. How does that God's sovereignty manifest itself in the organization of social life on earth? And what tends to emerge in Western civilization, again, it takes various different forms, and it's kind of vague, and there are all sorts of agreements, and I have to paint in broad brushstroke here, because I don't know if it's possible to paint in really clear brushstroke, because the whole thing is kind of fuzzy. It takes institutional form in a distinction between two institutions, church and state. You both answer to God. The ruler has to answer to God. The church has to answer to God. But they're given different jobs by God. And one of the ways this is expressed, one of the most common ways, is the distinction between God ordains a spiritual and a temporal power. That's one way it's phrased. So yes, Pauline epistle, Paul's epistle to the Romans, associate God ordains rulership and government and stuff. But rulership is given certain jobs by God, the government. The church is given other jobs by God. So it's all God, all God's ultimately, but he puts different people, human beings, in charge of different facets of life. Okay? That's how it plays. That's where you get the notion of church and state. It didn't exist before that. It did not exist till that point in time. And now the question you get is, okay, where does the spiritual end off? And you have these two authorities, okay, can I say precisely what each one is supposed to do? They both have to answer God, but they're given different tasks. That becomes very hard to do, to specify, this is only Caesar's and God has nothing to do with it. And, this is only God's, Caesar has nothing to do with it. For example, if you're to worship God in the church, you have to deal with Caesar, their zoning laws. I mean, that's stupid, but that's serious. That's, government touches on lots and lots of different things. On the other hand, if you're Caesar, we're going to just deal with the temporal stuff. We've got our toolkit here, and we do only those things. You put these over the things that Caesar deals with have a moral dimension. It involves making moral decisions about right and wrong. Are we allowed to do this? Are we not allowed to do this? Going to make up laws on a family. What are the rules that apply to families? Where do you go to get? Well, it's got to be from this point of view. Remember, one God, two authorities. Caesar's laws on the family have to correspond to God's plan. And you go back, so there's a lot of murkiness here. But the key is this institutional separation. And they argue endlessly over what the dividing line should be. Where does Caesar's authority end and the church's authorities begin? When does the authority of the church end? And the authority of the state begin? And that's a very hard question, much contested. Okay, but here comes, let me not go there. Let me back up for a second and then go where I was about to take it. If you think about it, this is actually developing my response to Luke's question further. The ancient world is organized how? Monistically. Is organized monistically. What do I mean by monistically? Fancy term, right? In the ancient world, there is one authority. Maybe the authority of the empire, maybe the authority of the polis, but there's one authority. There's one community. You remember, one community. It may be the community of the polis, it may be the community of the empire. But there's one community you're a member of. And there is one law emanating from that one authority that governs everything. As one author likes saying, the ancient world, one there is, he says. One authority ruling the world. It might be, the authority of the leader of the polis. It might be the authority of the leader of the empire. But one authority, and this authority's mandate is everything. There is nothing outside the authority of the ruler. You can't say, well, that's none of the ruler's business. If you're working this out from within this monistic theory, there is only one. Everything is the ruler's business. Everything falls within his responsibilities. Everything is in his jurisdiction. That's why when you look at Plato and Aristotle, for example, people we're more familiar with. That's right. Probably not many of us have read much on cosmological religion, but Plato and Aristotle, more of us have looked at and things. You look at their vision of the polis, and they're talking about stuff like, well, we will determine who gets married. We, the polis, will determine exactly how children get raised, what time they have to get up in the morning, what they eat, what they learn, because there's one authority regulates everything. Everything that is falls under the authority of the polis or the empire. Under it's monistic. There's a famous letter from Pope Galatius. Which one was it? I think it was Galatius IV, but I'm working from memory. I could be wrong. There are a bunch of Galatiuses in the early days of the papacy. It was a big name. Pope Galatius wrote a famous letter to the Roman emperor at the time, telling him basically, butt out of the church, get your nose out of my business. And the letter has in it a famous sentence. two there are, august emperor, by whom this world is ruled. Two, not one. Emperor monistic, hey, everything's under my authority, one authority, I got this, dude. The Pope says, no, there are two. You have your portfolio, I have my portfolio. So you do your thing, I'll do my thing. Not questioning your authority, but your authority is limited to certain things. Other more important things fall under my authority. So one there is versus two there are. That's one author does a real good job with this, transposes it. That way it's a debate between those two views. You with me? Monistic versus dualistic. You know, dualist meaning two, or if you want a fancier term, it's actually the proper term is diarchical. Diarchical. Dualistic isn't quite right, but it's the term commonly used. And whatnot. And a couple interesting things coming out of this are, number one, if you think you're looking at this from perspective of Caesar, you're the ruler, right? You have just undergone a tremendous demotion. Think of the blow to Caesar's ego. He used to rule everything. Now he only rules some things and somebody else rules the rest. And even worse, the other guy has the really important stuff. What Caesar has is trivial stuff like wars and taxes. What the church has are things like your relationship with God and your eternal salvation. So the emperor undergoes an incredible demotion here. Think about it, he used to be a god. And now look at him, he's worried his job is regulating taxes. He's a tax collector only. Second thing here, you see in this distinction, the genesis of the Western idea of limited government. The Western idea of limited government. Because in the ancient world, there were no limits on government, since government had an open-ended mandate to do good things because they're good. Okay? If it's a good thing, it falls under government's it's part of government's portfolio. Government handles this. Now, government's portfolio is limited. Government has not only lost a lot of its importance and prestige, but it now has a limited role in the overall scheme of human social life. Its role is limited. There are things that are none of its business, things it needs to shut up about, things it needs not to meddle in. And those are the most important things. So its portfolio is limited to things of secondary importance. So here you get a notion for a notion of limited government coming in. And by the way, one other note, and then I'll try to tie this point together. This diarchical system is an invitation to constant tension and constant conflict. Because I think it's safe to say, although they would not admit it, that neither side in our diarchical scheme, neither church nor state, is really happy with half a loaf. They both want to tend to, in practice, wherever there might be distinction in theory, they both tend in practice to absorb the other. The church tends to reduce the ruler to someone subordinate to the church, or someone appointed by the church. under its control and under its command. And they get a tiny little office at headquarters with no windows in the basement. Okay? On the other hand, the state wants to absorb the church. So a lot of modern politics, especially a lot of medieval and modern politics, are conflicts between church and state. And that's some sort of over territory, lots of battles and conflicts. Now I have some quotes I want to read you from Oakley on this, but I'm going to wait till next class, simply when you've already read it and stuff, to read it. But we'll come back and I'll read you the quotes supporting, show you where he talks about things I'm talking about now. But what is the importance of this to you and I? To our topic, religion in American political culture? There are certain kind of tentative groping conclusions we can draw. Okay? One would be this, that no matter how much we try to keep them separate, religion and politics are intrinsically connected. Some people might say religion and politics in American public life, how can that be? They got nothing to do with each other. They're different things. Well, in fact, they have a lot to do with one another, and they can't be completely disentangled. As we'll see when we get down to brass tacks, religion exercises a huge influence in the origins of America and continues to play an important role or lesser role in the course of American history. That's one of Tocqueville's point. He said, if you want to understand American democracy, you know what the first thing you look at is? American religion. Religion is, in matter of fact, the first of America's political institutions. He makes that claim, and he'll argue for it later, both chronologically, it shaped the political institutions, gave them their form to a large extent. And secondly, it's important because it sustains them. Okay? That's kind of takeaway number one. Takeaway number two, for our purposes, takes us back to this notion of substantive consensus. Because you kind of connect some dots here and you think about it, religion, connect some dots and think about it, you can see why someone might say religion and politics. Let's put it this way, religious pluralism is a political problem. Is something that the body politic needs to think about, something it needs to deal with, something it needs to address. Because if religion shapes politics, if you have different competing religions, they may be shaping politics in diametrically opposed ways. Remember, different understandings of what a human being is give you different kinds of societies, shape and mold the society. So housing competing different religions can be disruptive and divisive politically. It can cause political problems, cause political division. And I don't mean you might have, oh, this church supports the Republicans and this church supports the Democrats. That can happen. That can cause political difficulty. But I'm thinking of something more fundamental than that. If you have two religions with radically different understandings of what a human being is, and radically different understandings of what human beings should do with their lives, and radically conflicting understandings of how human beings should live, how are you going to unify the body politic in the face of those competing understandings? You have a formula there for civil war, certainly for civil conflict. Indeed, historically, there have been civil wars in which religion has played a role. I don't want to say there's any civil war in Western history that's purely religious in nature, but where religious differences were part of the division, for sure. And they're so connected at the time of the American founding. The conventional wisdom was that religious pluralism was playing with fire. For a body politic to have competing religions within it was a dangerous thing. It was going to blow up the society. You were going to get wars and revolutions and stuff. So when you organize a society, you need to see to it that everyone professes the same religion, that everyone thinks alike religiously. That was the prevailing opinion in the Western world, that a plurality of religions was politically debilitating. You were juggling nitroglycerin bottles, so it's bad things are inevitably going to happen to you. That was widely agreed. It was kind of the accepted wisdom. We may not like it. We say, oh, that's bad. We wish that weren't the case. But the conventional wisdom was that's the way things are, so you better deal with it. You better deal with it if you're a body politic. You better find a way to get religious uniformity, to get everyone on the same page religiously. You with me? Am I going too fast for anyone? Am I as clear as could be? I don't believe that for a minute, but in any case.
So when the founders were talking about religious pluralism,
Let me get to the, can you hold that off for a minute?
Okay.
Because the next step is when the founders talked about religious pluralism.
Okay.
Okay, that's exactly where I'm going with this. But America sort of presented a political problem in this regard, because you just going through very briefly, because I'm trying to get through some stuff today. When, if you look at the pattern of settlement, these early settler groups that come initially primarily New England, not only in New England, but primarily up in New England, they tended to be religiously homogeneous. For example, those guys, the Pilgrims, with Plymouth Rock and the funny hats and Thanksgiving, okay? They were all members of a particular religious movement. So they had something approaching religious uniformity. I say something approaching, let me do some hedges there, because they needed some carpenters. Okay, well, this guy's a member of our church, but we'll let him go. And stuff. And you look at the early 70s, that's the form they took. Massachusetts, you got the Pilgrims. They were called separatists, and the Puritan separatists. Then in the Massachusetts Bay Colony, what do you get? You get those Presbyterians, the hardcore Puritans. And then in Pennsylvania, you bring the Quakers. And in Virginia, you get a ton of Episcopalians initially. Well, later you get a lot of Baptists too. And so you have all these kind of communities separate from one another, little communities, that towns and stuff, that are religiously homogeneous. And how do you think you get Rhode Island? Rhode Island, if you know the history, came about because there were people who didn't like the way the people in the Massachusetts Bay Colony thought religiously. So the people in Massachusetts Bay Colony said, well, you can't be part of what we're doing if you don't think like us religiously. Please leave. Go away. Well, if you come back, we'll have to kill you. We can't have you people wrecking what we're trying to do here. So they moved to Rhode Island and set up their own thing there. And, so in it, you have all these different, in the period between, say, 1620, by the time you get to, say, 1750, you have practically every religion in Western Europe, present in the U.S. And you start with these little isolated communities. We have our religion. You guys 50 miles away, you got your religion, never the twain shall meet. I mean, we can unify to fight off Indians and stuff, but we can't like share a common life, live under the same laws, different religion. But then you start grouping them together. Okay, we got to create what we now call counties, alliances of these little communities. And suddenly you're including towns that profess different religions. And then as states emerge, you find yourself in states that may be a predominant religion. You know, in Massachusetts, they may be 75% what we call Presbyterians today. But 25% of them are Presbyterians. And some of these states had so much religious diversity, there wasn't even a majority religion. You know, it was, you know, this church has 30%, this one has 35%, these guys have 20%. And all of a sudden, without anyone planning it, what you have is religiously pluralistic states. And when the states unify together, you know, to form, you know, the United States of America, you have a republic that's even more pluralistic than any of the individual states are, because they include everything in there. Everything in there. And you know, this wasn't like necessarily accepted happily with a big smile. Great. There was a lot of unhappiness about it and grudges. If you look at early state constitutions, well, in order to vote in our state or own property, you have to hold to this set of beliefs. I mean, even at the time of the American Revolution, there were laws saying that, you know, Catholics could not vote and did not belong in certain states. Because they're the one, what united all the other churches, they didn't like the Catholics. There was a tiny Catholic minority. So they'd fight among themselves, but they could get common ground. And we may hate you guys, but at least you're not a Catholic, so we have something in common. We have the same enemy. And that can build solidarity, comradeship. So America sort of stumbles into it. It wasn't like they planned, let's set up a society with more religious pluralism than any place in the world. It was an accident. And then the question becomes, how do we navigate it? Conventional wisdom says this can't work. This is doomed. But America, it doesn't really have a choice. You know, when you're going to do mass suicide, for lots of reasons, you acknowledge we have to be unified because we can't survive on our own for various reasons, both economically and political. The ability to fight off European armies, which remember are in other parts of the continent, and looking for an opportunity to march in and reestablish us as, you know, well, 13 states as an English colony. So America sort of stumbles in this accidentally and has to find a way to manage it, has to try to find a way to make it work, because the alternative is too unpleasant to think about. So you have that. Does that address your question? Okay, there are different ways. I don't want to get into a big decision. There's different ways of trying to make this work. Certain states said, okay, well, at least we'll limit ourselves to Presbyterians and Congregationalists. They'd be the Church of Christ people today. That will just let them in our state, not have any Baptists, you know, not have any Catholics, no Lutherans. But, you know, so states tried to kind of establish some sort of broad, you know, set of arrangements that would limit the religious pluralism. At the end of the day, it, you know, doesn't work. People move. Especially when a lot of these states, you know, have big frontiers. People go, everyone moves out to the frontiers so they can have pieces of property and stuff like that. And so it doesn't work. So they're left trying to navigate it. You know, note one more thing under this point, and that is the First Amendment does not speak of a separation of church and state. It speaks of no laws establishing a religion. And who does it speak of? Congress. It says Congress shall make no laws respecting and establishing a religion. And we don't know how they came up with exactly that language. Our records of their debates are extremely fragmentary. A lot of them occurred informally in committees or sitting in taverns trying to negotiate something. But note it said Congress shall make no law. That left states free to have official state churches and potentially to even restrict the religious freedom of other churches. Okay? The deal was, in the face of this pluralism, the one thing nobody wanted is for the national government to step in and say, this is the way it's going to be everywhere now, boys. First Amendment was designed to leave each state alone to work out its own approach and its own plans. And into the 1830s, states had established state churches. And it was understood to be perfectly constitutional. Nobody said you can't do that now. Obviously you can do that. The whole First Amendment is written to prevent an established national church, an official nation, to leave sort of the pluralism of the states intact for them to manage. And that's an important part of the puzzle as well. Now, I wanted to say a few more. I almost got where I wanted to be this today, but not quite. Because there's a few more things to say about America. But my watch says 6:15. Amanda's watch says 6:16, I bet. And since it's the first day, I will give you 4 more minutes. Remember, I'll take them back some other day and keep you left.
Make a comment. When you're talking about the early American different religions that were there, it's much different than other forms of modern religious pluralism, where you have like Muslims and Hindus and people that believe different religions that are vastly different from each other. Whereas early American religious differences were just relatively minor things in comparison about Christianity.
Absolutely correct, and stealing my thunder for a brilliant lecture later, by the way. But absolutely correct. I mean, I'm giving this away since you brought up. The reason America was able to manage it was, although it looked on the outside, well, you got these 50 different churches, oh my God. It turned out these churches were all versions of Christianity. And they had a lot in common. You were dealing with relatively small differences. But, that's the answer how America was able to navigate it. Although there's an argument to be made, and several reputable scholars have made it, that today our religious pluralism is so much deeper and more radical than it was in, say, 1789, that you're really dealing with a different animal, and an animal that's much harder to manage. But we will come up to that, how the mix of pluralism has changed over the years. Down the road a piece. Is everyone good? Okay, for next class, let me give a reading assignment right now, save myself sending an email, because I'll likely forget. I anticipate a backlog of students asking for overrides and whatnot when I get to my room. When I get back there, read Oakley, and then I assume you've already read the Tocqueville reading for today. Read the Tocqueville reading for the 27th as well, because next class will be about 90% Tocqueville. Fair enough? We're good, folks.